English news as it should be.
Good morning, you're watching News 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra, and on the show today, tariff everywhere. Japan and South Korea have been slapped with a 25% reciprocal tariff by US President Donald Trump late last night. That is the big story that we're tracking for you. But with the extension now on August 1st, as the implementation date for the tariffs, the question now is India now provided with an extra elbow room to negotiate a trade deal with the US? Well, US President Donald Trump says India is very close to making a deal with the US. And also on the show, we will bring you the disparity in the markets this morning. US markets have sunk more than 1% in trade yesterday. Meanwhile, Asia is holding strong. Surprisingly, Japan as well as South Korea open in the green this morning. We'll try and decode that for you. You are watching Morning Brief at 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. First up, let's bring you all the headlines. US President Donald Trump signs tariff letters to 14 countries on tariffs starting August 1st. India, Canada, Mexico and European Union not in that list of 14. Tariffs ranging from 25% to 40% imposed on 14 countries, with a threat to double the rate if countries raise tariffs on US imports. With the tariff implementation date now set on August 1st, more elbow room for India to stitch up a mini trade deal. Trump says US is close to making a deal with India. Nasdaq and Dow Jones tank almost 1% in trade on Monday after tariff letters posted on Truth Social. S&P 500 slips 0.4%. But in a surprise move, Asian markets, including Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi, rise despite both countries facing 25% tariff on exports to the US. Meanwhile, Trump has also threatened additional 10% tariff on BRICS nations and countries aligning with what Trump calls anti-American policies of BRICS. But reports suggest Trump may be softening his stand on the BRICS tariff. In other news on BRICS, Prime Minister Narendra Modi says developed nations have a special responsibility in bridging gap between climate ambition and financing, noting that India's BRICS presidency next year will have a humanity-first approach. And fanning the de-dollarization debate, Russian President Vladimir Putin tells BRICS leaders that era of liberal globalization is obsolete. Future belongs to emerging markets that should enhance use of their national currencies for trade. And in other news from the market regulator, 91% of individual traders have lost money in equity derivatives in financial year 25. This as per a new study by SEBI. Our top story this morning, US President Donald Trump on Monday sent tariff letters to 14 nations, with Japan and South Korea being the first recipients of those letters. The 14 countries have been slapped with reciprocal tariffs ranging from 25% to 40% on their exports to the United States. Now, Trump dispatched the first batch of letters to various nations just days before his 90-day extension to the Liberation Day tariffs was coming to an end. Japan and South Korea have been hit with 25% tariffs starting August 1st.
Could you move firm? No, I would say firm, but not 100% firm. If they call up and they say, would like to do something a different way, we're going to be open to that. But essentially, that's the way it is right now, yeah.
Are the tariff letters that you sent today final offers, or are they negotiable?
More or less final offer.
So South Korea, Japan should take it or leave it?
We're always subject to negotiate something that's fair, but we've talked to most of the countries, and pretty much they've had their way for many, many decades, as you know. And it was time that we just wanted fairness. This is not really equitable from our standpoint, because it's just a small token by comparison to the damage that's been done over the years. But we had no other president that was willing to do this. I did it in my first term with China and others. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs. No inflation, the most successful period of time that we've ever had financially in the country. The first term. I think this term is going to be much better, even much better than that. That was the best ever, and this is going to be, I think, substantially better. And we're on the way to doing that. We've already taken in over $100 billion worth of tariffs, and we haven't even started.
Well, Trump there saying that he is open to discussions with Japan and South Korea, providing them those additional 3 weeks now to perhaps go ahead and try and stitch a trade deal. But even as Trump dispatched letters to leaders of the 14 countries, Trump said that the US is close to making a trade deal with India, and that he's sending letters to those who didn't think they were going to be able to make a deal. Listen in.
We're close to making a deal with India. Others we met with, and we don't think we're going to be able to make a deal, so we just send them a letter. If you want to play ball, you have to. This is what you have to pay. So as far as I'm concerned, we're done. We're sending out letters to various countries, telling them how much tariffs they have to pay. Some will maybe adjust a little bit, depending if they have a cause. We're not going to be unfair about it. And actually, it's a small fraction compared to what we should be getting. We could be asking for much more, but for the sake of relationships that we've had with a lot of really good countries, we're doing the way I do it.
Meanwhile, the deadline, the 90-day extension to the deadline, which was to lapse on July 9th, has now been moved to August 1st. The 3-week extension is aimed at giving trading partners more time to seal new agreements. Meanwhile, Press Secretary Caroline Levitt said that Trump is using the extra time period to push for last-minute deals, warning that nations failing to act will face his reciprocal tariff rate in August.
The President will also sign an executive order today delaying the July 9th deadline to August 1st. So the reciprocal tariff rate, or these new rates that will be provided in this correspondence to these foreign leaders, will be going out the door within the next month, or deals will be made. And those countries continue to negotiate with the United States. We've seen a lot of positive developments in the right direction, but the administration, the president, and his trade team want to cut the best deals for the American people and the American worker. That's what they're focused on.
All right, trying to cut the best deals for the American people and making America perhaps great again seems to be the underlying vision for Donald Trump. Will he be able to do that? Well, joining me to discuss this developing story is Dr. Jayan Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to WTO, Barnik Chitran Matra, PE investor and managing partner, Chrysalis Equity Ventures, as well as economist Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates. Barnik, let me begin by asking you, the more things change, the more they seem to be the same. Japan and South Korea have been slapped with a 25% reciprocal tariff, almost exactly the same rate that was slapped on the 2nd of April. No deal in 90 days. Potentially Trump vying for a deal to come through in the next 3 weeks, given that August 1st now seems to be the deadline for tariffs to be implemented.
Yeah, I think this is a sign that not a lot of trade deals are happening. I think after the Liberation Day tariffs, there was an expectation that there'd be 30 to 40 trade deals, but to be fair, only 2 trade deals have been signed. There has been a notable trade deal between the US and UK, and then an announcement of a trade deal between US and Vietnam. I think there are rumors of intense negotiations with India on a trade deal. I think even though the president announced that there is a likely trade deal, what will happen may be a mini trade deal. So again, as you pointed out in your story, if you look at the markets, I think markets around the world, except for the US, have not really reacted to these announcements. I think it's the US markets which have reacted negatively, because all of these trade deals actually mean the likelihood of a recession in the US becomes far higher, because imports will go up in anticipation of some of these tariffs kicking in. So again, it's more of the same. It's confusion as usual, and let's see where this pans out for us.
We will, of course, see what really is in store for India, because Donald Trump there also saying that US is very close to signing that trade deal with India. Dr. Dasgupta, trade deal with India in the making, discussions had been on, discussions then came to an end, and then there were reports that 24 to 48 hours is when we can see a trade deal announced between India and the US, a mini trade deal, as Barnik was just mentioning. Now, with the tariff deadline extended to the 1st of August, do we still hope for some sort of an announcement to happen within the next 24 hours or so, honoring the original deadline which was to lapse on July 9th? Or do you think another round of negotiations will now go through and really firm up something more substantial in the mini trade deal for India?
Is the question addressed?
The question
to me?
is for you. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I think in this context, the Japanese have already responded. They have said that this is just an extension for renegotiation or extended negotiations. So I think this is of a piece with what President Trump has been doing in the past. He's been setting a deadline and then extending it, hoping that he would get the other side to the table and get a favorable deal. So this is up to the two sides. But having said that, I think there are reports that India has already finalized its offers, and it has left it to President Trump to accept it or not to accept it. So I don't think there would be, of course, negotiations and talks going on between the two sides, because they have to finalize the first tranche by September, October of this year. But the first offer, which was to come into place from both sides by the 9th of July, that has only been extended to 1st of August. So I think the onus lies on the US to either accept it or ask for more, which is the most likely outcome, I think.
Absolutely. Well, Mithali, let me bring you into this discussion. Of course, India's pain points with respect to going ahead and striking that deal with the US continue to be agriculture and dairy. And given the fact that Bihar elections are around the corner, maize and soybean, which is something that US wants India to import more of, is likely to impact the farmers in Bihar. Now, is this something which the timing of it seems a little too crucial for India to bend on?
Absolutely. So Karthik, I'm actually in the US right now, speaking to you from New York today.
All right.
And I can tell you that the mood on the street is one where President Trump is being referred here locally as what they call as the Teflon president. So basically, anything that he announces, anything that he says, it seems to just rub off of his image, and he's surviving like a Teflon president at this point in time. And a lot of people are saying that, let's see what kind of deals are struck. Of course, India is one of the major countries that a lot of people are watching, analysts are watching, both economic analysts as well as political analysts, but also looking at some of the other countries to see what kind of deals can be struck, which are best for the US consumer. And frankly, when we look at the situation in India, right, of course, it's very important for us to safeguard our agriculture sector, because the kind of subsidies that the US is offering to its soybean farmers, the kind of subsidies that the US offers to its corn farmers, the kind of subsidies the US offers to its sugarcane farmers, we can't match those, because these farming groups have actually got these subsidies over the last 3 to 4 decades, and they are very established industrial farming ecosystems that I've actually been witnessing over the last couple of weeks as I've been, traveling through New Jersey, as I've been traveling through Massachusetts and Boston, and I'm looking at some of these farms and seeing, how agriculturally and technologically advanced they are. We really can't compare that with the kind of, situation that we are in with our agricultural markets at this point. So it's important for us to safeguard our markets.
All right, but we have been trying to safeguard our agri sector, our dairy sector for decades as well, Dr. Dasgupta. And do you think it is time, perhaps tariff may not be and the deadline may not be the right way to do it, but is there now scope, at least for India, to ensure that our own agriculture and dairy sectors become globally competitive minus the subsidies?
If you look at the entire world, countries have been subsidizing their agriculture for ages now. So to think of a time when, subsidies, India can make do without subsidies and other countries will continue with subsidization, I think is not going to happen. So India will have to continue with its subsidies, but of course they should be rationalized and they should be reduced, and subsidies which actually deplete the water, for instance, or degrade the soil by the usage of indiscriminate usage of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, etc. That should be, I think, brought down and stopped eventually. So that is one point. The second point is that if you look at the structure of Indian agriculture, you have to look at simultaneously the manufacturing sector, because the agriculture sector engages 46% of our working population, and another 11% are engaged in allied activities. Now, if you were to, there are experts who are saying that we should consolidate, we should have larger holdings, etc., etc. But what will happen to the people who are dependent for their livelihoods on agriculture? They will have to be provided gainful employment elsewhere. And unless your manufacturing and services picks up and is able to absorb the additional labor which will, come out of agriculture, there is not going to be a solution.
Fair point, sir. I think
we have to provide, irrigation, for instance. That is the first thing, because with irrigation, your productivity will go up,
right.
And two, the employment to the labor, landless labor, will also go up, along with the small farmers' incomes, etc. So,
right.
Irrigation is the first thing. The second thing is development of indigenous high-yielding seeds. Whether we take the genetically modified seeds, fruit, or we do it otherwise, is on our scientists and our government. But we have to do that. These two things are of the essence. And the third one, which goes without saying, is a marketing network which will have to have a warehousing system and cold storage facilities, so that especially fruits and vegetables which are subject to quick decay, they don't lose their value, and they can reach the market even after a lapse of some time.
Absolutely. I see your point, Dr. Dasgupta. Barnik, let's bring you back here. And this is a discussion that we have year after year, especially around the budget time, around the month of Jan and Feb, that India will need both subsidies to coexist along with capital expenditure to be incurred for agriculture and dairy to become competitive at one end, and further on, the migration of farm labor into factories is something that India has been trying to do but hasn't been able to do very successfully thus far. Now with this added pressure from the US and the fact that diversification of supply chains is now in the making, and that seems to be the new world order, is it time for India to really double down on its manufacturing and becoming the factory of the world in the China plus one narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at, again, the numbers, I think even though agriculture accounts for nearly 57% of the employment, it contributes to only 13% of India's GDP. So it is actually a very inefficient use of labor and inefficient use of resources. I think the larger challenge for India is that sectors like agriculture will always be globally uncompetitive. The yields we have are 1/5 to 1/8 of the world, and it is actually only supported because it employs, or rather I would say underemploys, a large swath of our economy. I think the bigger challenge for us is structural reform to drive manufacturing. I think the good news of these tariffs is that supply chains, particularly in manufacturing like automotive, electronics, semicon, is going to get diversified out of China. There is a big opportunity for India to increase its share of manufacturing from around 15% of its GDP to 25%. And unless we do that, we cannot manage the big labor underemployment or overemployment in agriculture, which is one of the reasons why the sector is so uncompetitive. So I don't see any major changes in India's stance on agriculture. I see it highly unlikely to be opened up. But that being said, the imperative to make manufacturing more competitive stays. And I would call it a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to grab this and create a sector which can create millions of jobs every year as we move forward.
All right, Mithali, of course, there is no debate that India has to up its game when it comes to manufacturing, especially now with, let's say, Japan and South Korea in the advent of them being unable to stitch a deal with the US in 3 weeks, even though Trump is hopeful that a trade deal will be struck. The fact is that manufacturing, especially the sectors that Barnik spoke about, automobiles as well as electronics, is not going to move to the US. So making America great again by getting more jobs in American factories is something which is unlikely to happen, and US will continue to import inflation. And that is something that we are seeing as a reaction on the US stock market also, as it closed almost 1% down yesterday on Monday. So the point really is that in the era of manufacturing not moving to the US hypothetically and imports becoming more expensive for the US, now, what should India's real strategy be, not just to navigate through this challenging time of negotiating tariffs, but as a long-term manufacturing hub for the world?
No, absolutely. Karthik, at this point in time, when I'm looking at the preparedness of the US industrial sector, which is what I'm studying here, I find that, there are certain industries, definitely when we look at, for example, the high-tech industries, which are actually well primed for the US to continue investing in, for the US to generate a lot of local jobs in. But besides these high-tech semiconductor industries, it's not possible for the US to be setting up large-scale manufacturing at the kind of cost advantage and the cost that they can get if the manufacturing was done overseas, particularly in Asia. Now, when we look at the Asian landscape, aside from China, there are of course other countries like Vietnam which are offering the US very good competitive terms for manufacturing cheaply, and there are very beautiful industrial estates that I myself have seen in Vietnam, which are highly industrialized, where the logistics facilities are highly advanced. So for India to compete with this Asian landscape, not only China, but all of the East Asian countries that are very highly industrialized and competitive at manufacturing, we have to now sit and invest in making our industrial parks highly competitive globally. And that is an effort that we need to do pronto. We have been doing for the last 5 to 7 years. I would say, the Make in India policy, the production linked incentive scheme, and the national logistics policy coming together have really brought in that effort and have really brought in that push from the government side, but we also need to push from the private sector side to link our industrial areas with gateways like ports, like inland waterways, like even the inland container depots, so that this entire landscape of manufacturing and logistics together can bring in the cost advantage that we need to deliver to be able to be competitive on a global scale. But of course, we also have to pick some sectors, and semiconductors has to be one of those sectors. Electronics has to be one of those sectors. We have to pick some sectors which have very high demand globally, on which we can deliver with high precision technology, because that can be really a game changer for India.
All right, and we will also talk about the low technology but highly labor intensive sectors, especially apparel, leather, textiles, etc. But meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has reacted to US President Donald Trump's newly imposed tariff rates, calling the announcement deeply regrettable. He stated that Tokyo will continue pushing for a fair bilateral trade deal with Washington, but won't accept quick or one-sided concessions. Listen in. Okay, meanwhile, we also have leaders of the BRICS summit which have pushed back on Monday after US President Donald Trump accused the bloc of anti-American and warned of new tariffs. Brazil's President Lula da Silva fired back, saying the world doesn't need an emperor, in a clear swipe at Trump's rhetoric. The warning from Donald Trump came just hours before Washington sent out these dozens of trade letters and tariff letters for imposing broad retaliatory tariffs. Listen in.
No queremos imperador.
So we don't want an emperor. Our countries are sovereign. if Trump issues tariffs, other countries have the right to do the same. There is the reciprocity law.
Eu acho muito.
I think it's irresponsible for a president from a country like the U.S. to threaten the world with tariffs on social media.
Em redes digitais.
Honestly, there are other forums for the president of a country the size of the United States to talk to other countries.
Os países.
All right, Ambassador Das Gupta, last word to you on this debate, sir. Now that we are on the verge of a trade deal possibly being announced in a day or two, the fact that this is likely to be a mini deal and the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement scheduled for the fall of this year, what needs to be India's strategy from this mini deal to the full-fledged bilateral trade agreement? Because we may not give a lot of concessions right now, but we will perhaps put our foot down on certain sectors that we've discussed, including agriculture and dairy. We will perhaps push for labor-intensive sectors like apparel and textiles and leather goods. But from here to the first tranche of the full-fledged bilateral trade agreement, what needs to be India's priority, and what could be some issues on which India may be in a position to concede some ground?
It's not going to be an easy task for India.
No doubt, sir.
But the only consolation is that there are many other countries which are in the same boat. So I think the first thing is to coordinate our responses, to get together, for instance, with Japan, with Korea, with the European Union, and formulate a kind of a uniform response to the US, because this kind of bullying and unpredictability, at the drop of a hat, President Trump has been announcing the shifting of deadlines, the imposition of new tariffs, the withdrawal of the new tariffs, which were announced just one day earlier, because now he seems to have said that, or his cabinet has said that this 10% additional tariffs on anti-American, bias of BRICS, any country aligning with that will be subjected to 10% tariffs. That seems to have been withdrawn in some ways, because the US has not clarified as to what will be considered an anti-American alignment. The second point is the Brazilian President Lula has also mentioned that the President Trump's statements are anti-American. So, we are getting into the theater of the absurd. So it is very difficult for India to say that, all right, I will give you these concessions and I will sign an agreement, because the US has nothing to offer apart from, lowering the tariffs which it had raised in an anti-WTO manner. So, right. Because the US doesn't have a trade promotion authority, so it can't give tariff concessions on any of the areas that we are interested in. For instance, textiles and clothing, leather, gems and jewelry, pharmaceuticals, etc., etc. So, whatever we give to them, they will pocket. And mind you, President Trump is not going to last forever. His term comes to an end in January 2029.
That's right.
So, whatever upheaval he brings about, and he may bring about a great deal more, will be there for the next 3 years or so. So that is the time horizon that we have to bear in mind when signing on to any deal. And the deal should also have a kind of a sunset clause, that it will only last till, let's say, 3.5 years or 3 years, whatever.
Right. Well, of course, that is likely to get countries to play along for some time without really making those capital investments that Donald Trump is really hoping on. But Ambassador Das Gupta, Barnik, Mitali, thank you so much for your time this morning. And it's not just India which is close to inking that trade deal with the US. European Union says it is also on track to finalize a trade deal with the US by July 9th. Now, this comes after what officials described as a good exchange between European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and US President Donald Trump. Now, Brussels remains optimistic despite recent tariff tensions and political headwinds. Take a look.
The European Union still aims to reach a trade deal with the US by July 9th. That's according to a Commission spokesperson on Monday. They said Commission leader Ursula von der Leyen and US President Donald Trump had a good exchange. But it wasn't immediately clear whether there had been a meaningful breakthrough in talks over tariffs. EU spokesperson Olaf Gill.
We want to reach a deal with the US. We want to avoid tariffs. We believe they cause pain. We want to achieve win-win outcomes, not lose-lose outcomes.
The EU hopes to stop the imposition of sweeping tariff hikes by the US. The clock is ticking on a deadline for countries around the world to complete deals with Washington. That after Trump unleashed a global trade war that has hit markets and seen policymakers try to protect their economies. Trump on Sunday said the US was close to finalising several trade pacts in coming days. He further said Washington would notify other countries by July 9th of higher tariff rates. He said they wouldn't take effect until August 1st, which gave a 3-week reprieve. Trump also took aim at members of the developing nations BRICS group as its leaders met in Brazil. He threatened an additional 10% tariff on any countries aligning themselves with what he called the anti-American policies of BRICS. The EU has been torn over whether to push for a quick and light trade deal or back its own economic power in trying to negotiate a better outcome. It had already dropped hopes for a comprehensive trade agreement before the July deadline.
Alright, we will slip into a very short break at this moment, but coming up on the other side of the break, we will have Kranti Bhatini with us, who will break down for us why we are seeing this disparity between US markets on the fear of importing inflation tanking, but Asia, despite the 25% tariffs on Japan and South Korea, holding up well. Meanwhile, Indian markets have opened flat. We will bring you all the market action on the other side of the break. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
Delivery boy has picked your order.
We know you are hungry. The message notification said it would take 30 minutes.
We can't just rely on a message.
Didn't you sell some shares yesterday?
Yes.
So did you check them?
I got a message.
You can't just rely on one message. If you make any transactions in the stock market, cross-check the SMS or email you receive from the stock exchange with your Demat account as well as bank statement.
Beta, when one's hungry, the brain doesn't function properly.
So much good. Invest कर.
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया।
ये होल्डर का तेरे लिए मंगाओ? मेरे नए म्यूजिक गॉगल्स मंगाओ क्या?
ये नई गाड़ी कप होल्डर है, ठोकी भी रख सकते हैं, म्यूजिक भी।
सेविंग्स की विद्या तो कोई तुझसे सीखे।
कुछ बड़ा बनाना है तो पहले बचाओ। फेडरल बैंक से रिश्ता बनाओ।
सर, पेन रिलीफ के लिए
ये देखो, ये काफी है।
2 हफ्ते का टूर है, कहीं कम ना पड़ जाए।
दुबे जी, ये छोटा सा डायनाबार QPS प्लस आपके 2 स्प्रे के बराबर है।
पेश है डायनाबार QPS प्लस।
लगा के देखो, मान जाओगे।
डायनाबार QPS प्लस।
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9 right here on News9. Let's bring you all the market action, beginning first with the US. Now, Wall Street ended Monday with steep losses as investors reacted to US President Donald Trump's announcement of new tariffs targeting Japan, South Korea and other key trading partners. Here's a look at how Wall Street fared.
U.S. stocks closed lower on Monday, with the Dow, S&P 500 and Nasdaq each shedding just under 1%. All 3 indexes added to losses after President Donald Trump announced 25% tariffs on Japanese and South Korean imports due to take effect on August 1st. Stocks wobbled further later in the day when Trump announced hefty tariffs on several other countries, including South Africa and Malaysia. Ross Mayfield, investment strategist at Baird, said stocks could retreat further as Trump continues to pressure U.S. trade partners.
So we've got some actual numbers put on trade partners, big trade partners, and then the threat of additional tariffs. You know, we kicked the can down the road a little bit from July 9th to August 1st, but not a lot, still not a lot of time to make trade deals with 50 plus countries. So I think there's a continuing anticipation and anxiety about what the final trade deal and tariff levels will look like.
The S&P 500's biggest drag came from shares of Tesla, which fell nearly 7% after CEO Elon Musk announced the formation of a new political party, further escalating his feud with Trump. It was the stock's biggest daily slide since June 5th and its lowest closing level since that session. Among other movers, shares of WNS Holdings rallied more than 14%, after the French IT services firm Capgemini agreed to buy the outsourcing firm for $3.3 billion in cash. And shares of NVIDIA-backed CoreWeave fell more than 3% after the AI hyperscaler said it will buy crypto miner Core Scientific in an all-stock deal valued at about $9 billion. Shares of Core Scientific plunged more than 17.5%.
All right, so massive cuts in the US last night on Wall Street, but Asia, despite Japan and South Korea having been slapped with a 25% retaliatory tariff or reciprocal tariff, as Trump calls it, still holding positively this morning. In fact, look at Kospi, which is up almost 1.25% in trade this morning. This is a country, South Korea, which has been slapped with that 25% tariff. Well, of course, there is also the other side to it, that there is this 3-week window now for South Korea to potentially come on the table. At least that seems to be Donald Trump's expectation from the country. Meanwhile, even Japan registering positive gains this morning. The Kospi, the Nikkei, I beg your pardon, 225 is up about 1/3 of a percentage point. Meanwhile, other Asian stocks, including Hang Seng, Hong Kong Stock Exchange, is also up almost 1% in trade. Shanghai Composite Index, China's main index, is also up almost 0.6% in early trade this morning. Let's look at the Kospi heat map first and try and see how are companies, individual companies, reacting to Trump tariffs. And positively, one could say on the block, especially the finance companies in South Korea. Meanwhile, the main exporters to the US seem to be having, as expected, a bad day. Look at LG, it's down almost 3% in early trade this morning. It's a major electronics exporter to the US. LG is seeing cuts of about 3%. Samsung, meanwhile, is down about 1.5% or so in trade. Meanwhile, finance companies, like I told you, doing well, and overall, the health technology companies, which again export to the US, are not having a great day in the markets. But overall, the index is up about 1.25% in trade. Meanwhile, let's look at the Japanese Nikkei 225 index and look at what we are seeing there. Well, the auto companies, Toyota, which finds a major market in the US despite the 25% tariffs, is up about 0.5 percentage point or so. Meanwhile, other electronics makers, including Sony, which exports to the US, is also up about 0.3% or so. Look at the manufacturing companies like Hitachi, for example. The stock is up about 3% in trade. So a sort of a divergence that one is seeing between how US is reacting to inflation being imported into the country versus perhaps how some of the companies which export to the US are looking at a better top line could be one of the arguments. Meanwhile, the Indian markets have opened flat. Let's bring up the mood check on Dalal Street this morning. Sensex and Nifty both registering absolutely flat momentum today. Second decimal point increase. Nifty 50 still below the 25,500 mark. Sensex, on the other hand, just about barely managing to scrape the 83,500 levels. Volatility has lowered. Yesterday around this time, 12.7 was India VIX. Today it is at about 12.46. Let's pull up the Nifty 50 heat map also and try and see which are the sectors where there is some sort of a reaction being felt this morning. Well, Reliance, which had seen healthy gains yesterday on account of OPEC Plus increasing its August supply, is now seeing some sort of a correction, perhaps some profit booking. The stock is down about 0.4% or so. Meanwhile, auto companies in India are not having a great day. In fact, Maruti Suzuki and M&M are both down in trade this morning. Tata Motors, on the other hand, which does have a little bit of a market in the US, especially with Jaguar Land Rover, the UK's company which exports to the US, perhaps some rub-off, and we are seeing Tata Motors gaining about 0.7% or so in trade. IT companies more or less intact, not much movement with respect to what we saw overnight flowing from the US. Kranti Batini joins me this morning. Kranti, good morning. We could not have done the show without you being here with us today to just put all this in perspective, the divergence that we are seeing between US and Asia, and absolutely no reaction on the Indian stock markets. What do you make of this?
Karthik, these are the early reactions to the market, what Wall Street have responded, and later on, what Trump is trying to send a message to them is to, especially for South Korea, which is a strong trading partner, one of the strong ally of US, and also the Japan, one of the strong trading partner. He is sending a warning to them. That's where the market is pursuing at this point of time. Definitely, both are the trading partners. And with respect to the Indian emerging markets are concerned, like Taiwan and India, there seems to be the finalization of the trade deal is on cards for both the countries, including some other small nations. So that's where Indian market is showing some kind of resilience. But still, Karthik, the narrative, whatever be the statements, what we are getting, if you perceive that these are the final, the narrative can change at any point of time. That's where the uncertainty is in the US policy making, creating the uncertainty at this point of time. When we look at the data, look at the narrative on a lighter note. Elon Musk, just a couple of months back, he was rubbing his shoulder with President Trump, and what he is doing today. So this is the scenario we are facing. So I don't get surprised if these what the tariff warnings, what Trump is giving, and if South Korea and Japan, if they allows some kind of a relaxation with respect to taking their US agriculture products into their ration, then the tariffs are going to come down significantly. So still there is some kind of a time. These are the warning signals he is sending to these nations.
Right. So warning, I mean, it's been a long road for warnings to be issued, starting from Jan 20th through the 2nd of April, Liberation Day, tariffs, then a 90-day pause. And just as that window was to expire, now there's another extension till 1st August. So I hear you, Kranti. I think what you're trying to say is that the only thing certain about Donald Trump's tariff policy is uncertainty. And that is something that economies and markets are bracing themselves with.
Absolutely, Karthik, you nailed it. The certainty about is uncertainty.
Right. So now I want to especially come to some of the Indian stocks which are reacting quite drastically to what we saw overnight. And one stock which is really popping out on the radar today happens to be Titan. The stock is down almost 5.6% or so in trade. What are you making of Titan this morning, Kranti?
It is the early trades, Karthik. We need to see how the day is going to progress. But in specific to Titan is concerned, they have given the business update and some kind of numbers disappointment. That's what creating some kind of a selling pressure on Titan, because other players have done phenomenally well in terms of the last quarter updates are concerned. Especially the gold retailers are concerned. Street have not accepted, because Titan is a large cap, fully priced in stock. Any kind of negative updates are some kind of a update of slow business that can have immediate impact on names like Titan. So that's what we are witnessing. But these are the early trades. We need to see how next couple of hours is going to progress.
All right, we will wait for the next couple of hours, if not the next few days. But another sector which has so far been escaping, if one can call, the whole tariff narrative has been the pharma sector. Once upon a time, Donald Trump, not too long ago, had said that there are going to be tariffs like never seen before on pharma companies across the world. But this time around also, despite the extension, pharma seems to be one sector which Trump has not explicitly mentioned a tariff rate on. But pharma stocks this morning, Cipla is down about 1.26%, Dr. Reddy's is down about 1.7%. Is there some sort of fear now that since Trump has extended the deadline but is still sure that he will go ahead with tariffs one way or another, is there some sort of a fear in pharma investors today that perhaps the next announcement from Trump could be on this sector?
Definitely, the lingering impact about these tariffs is still playing on pharma sector is concerned, and the players who have the major exposure to US markets, Karthik, in the medium to short term, this lingering impact is still there. But one thing what we need to conceive is if the Trump is going to increase any tariff, especially on the pharma segment is concerned, that's going to have a negative impact for the US consumers. And again, to replicate the kind of a production and the good manufacturing practices and US FDA norms, getting clearances and replacing the Indian pharma companies is not going to be an overnight exercise. So the US administration very much aware about this fact. That is the reason they try to go soft with respect to pharma is concerned, because one way they are worried about the rising healthcare prices in US, costs in US. So that's where the administration is still mulling with respect to pharma is concerned. That is the overhang that is getting created on Indian pharma companies in the medium to short term. Still, everybody crosses their fingers how this entire episode of this tariff war is going to be.
Absolutely. Well, let's leave it at that this morning. Kranti Patini, always a pleasure having you here on News 9, and thank you for simplifying all that we see on those charts day after day. Pleasure having you with us. And moving on now quickly to other stories that we are tracking for you. The frenzy in India's equity derivatives market is once again under scrutiny, and the numbers are concerning. Now, according to a fresh SEBI report released on Monday, a staggering 91% of individual traders lost money trading equity derivatives in financial year 24-25. Now, this comes despite several regulatory interventions, including October 2024's reforms that aim to limit retail exposure to risky index options. But SEBI now says that the impact on investor protection has been minimal. In fact, retail participation in equity derivatives, especially index options, remains significantly higher than global averages. SEBI launched this latest review in response to reports suggesting that losses were reducing under the new framework. Now, while notional turnover is down almost 30% year on year, it's still 42% above the 2023 levels. Even premium turnover by retail investors has declined 11% this year, yet remains 36% higher than FY23. Now, SEBI's 6-year data shows a clear and worrying trend that small traders are consistently losing money in F&O trades. To curb the risks, the regulator has now introduced new measures as of May 29, from stricter disclosures to enhanced risk indicators and steps to prevent manipulation in single stock derivatives. According to SEBI, it will continue to monitor turnover trends closely to ensure market stability and investor safety. The 17th BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India would redefine the BRICS grouping under its upcoming chairmanship. Now, in his address, PM Modi said, and I quote, "Under India's BRICS chairmanship, we will define BRICS in a new form. BRICS would mean building resilience and innovation for cooperation and sustainability. In the coming year, under India's BRICS chairmanship, we will continue close cooperation on all subjects." Prime Minister Modi also emphasized that India will carry forward the global-centric, global South-first approach it adopted during its G20 presidency. He said BRICS must become a platform that champions the voices of developing nations and helps build a multipolar and inclusive world order. Earlier in the day, the Prime Minister joined fellow BRICS leaders, partners and outreach invitees for the traditional family photo symbolizing unity and collaboration among emerging partners. Now, as India prepares to assume the BRICS chairship in 2026, the tone set in Rio marks a major shift towards reform-driven, inclusive multilateralism, with New Delhi expected to steer the bloc with a human-first, development-focused agenda. Prime Minister Modi received a warm welcome as he arrived in Brasilia, the next stop on his 5-nation tour after attending the 17th BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro. Brazil's Minister of Defense received him at the airport. Now, during his visit, PM Modi will hold bilateral discussions with Brazilian President Lula da Silva on broadening the strategic partnership between the two nations in areas of mutual interest, including trade, defense, energy, space technology, agriculture, health, and people-to-people linkages. This, according to a Ministry of External Affairs statement. And in other global stories that we're tracking for you this morning, US President Donald Trump said he's open to lifting sanctions on Iran, but only when the timing is right. Speaking alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, President Trump said the recent easing of sanctions on Syria could serve as a model for Iran if conditions improve in Damascus. Here's what President had to say.
One of the things we have with Iran is, we have they are very biting sanctions. And I would love to be able to, at the right time, take those sanctions off, give them a chance at rebuilding, because I'd like to see Iran build itself back up in a peaceful manner and not going around saying death to America, death to the USA, death to Israel, as they were doing. They were the bully of the Middle East, and now they're not the bully anymore. But they were saying terrible things, and would like to see them. They have such potential, they have the oil power, and they have great people, smart people, energetic people, amazing. And I know so many Iranians from New York. I have a lot of friends, and they're great people.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared that the liberal model of globalization is obsolete. Addressing the 17th BRICS summit via video link, Putin said the global power balance is shifting away from a unipolar system benefiting the golden billion towards a more just multipolar world. He urged BRICS nations to expand cooperation in trade, energy, logistics and finance, and pushed for greater use of national currencies in cross-border transactions. Putin also proposed creating a BRICS-led financial settlement and depository system to enable faster, more secure payments, and said economic momentum is clearly moving towards emerging markets. US automaker Tesla's shares fell almost 7% on Monday under pressure from investor concerns about the shifting focus of its chief Elon Musk as he announced a new political party, marking a new escalation in his feud with President Donald Trump. Rising tensions with the US president, struggling sales and an aging vehicle lineup have weighed heavily on Tesla's stock. Take a look.
Tesla shares fell nearly 7% in pre-market trading on Monday. Investors sold off after CEO Elon Musk announced he would form a new US political party. It raised their concerns about his commitment to the electric vehicle maker's future. Musk unveiled the America Party on Saturday, which marked the latest escalation in his recent feud with President Donald Trump. It also comes shortly after Tesla posted a second straight drop in deliveries. The update further worried investors who've watched the stock fall more than a fifth this year. Trump and Musk's relationship erupted into an all-out social media brawl in early June over the president's tax bill. Trump threatened to cut Musk's government contracts and subsidies. Musk spent nearly $300 million supporting Trump and other Republicans last year. But he said in May he would scale back political spending and remain Tesla CEO for another 5 years. One analyst said investors cheered Musk's step back from frontline politics, but they added they're now worried he's going to get sucked back in and take his eyes off the automaker. On Sunday, Trump called Musk's plans to form the America Party ridiculous. Tensions with Trump, struggling sales and an aging vehicle lineup have weighed heavily on Tesla's stock.
And before we end this bulletin, let's leave you with all the headlines that you must track this Tuesday morning. US President Donald Trump signs tariff letters to 14 countries on tariffs starting August 1st. India, Canada, Mexico and European Union not in that list of 14. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba calls Donald Trump's new tariff announcement deeply regrettable, vows Tokyo will keep negotiating but won't bow to one-sided demands. European Union says it's still aiming to finalize a trade deal with the US by July, following good exchange between Trump and EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. Leaders at the BRICS summit push back after Donald Trump accuses them of being anti-American. Brazil's President Lula da Silva fires back, saying the world doesn't need an emperor. US President Donald Trump says he's open to lifting sanctions on Iran, but only under the right conditions, cites the easing of Syria sanctions as a possible model. Fanning the de-dollarization debate, Russian President Vladimir Putin tells BRICS leaders that era of liberal globalization is obsolete. Future belongs to emerging markets that should enhance use of their national currencies for trade. Tesla shares sink 7% as Elon Musk's political feud with President Donald Trump rattles investors. Weak sales and an aging lineup add to Wall Street's growing doubts. TikTok is developing a US-specific version of its application ahead of a possible sale to American investors, part of broader effort to meet national security demands of Washington. And in the first, e-commerce giant Amazon stretches its Prime Day event to 96 hours this year, with US shoppers expected to spend nearly $24 billion during the extended sales window. And that's a wrap on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. Thank you so much for watching. News continues right here on News9.
बढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल